Right. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Corey, for setting this all up, and for folks for having us. Is the mic working? I guess just for video. So everyone can hear me in the back? Good. So I'll share kind of three thoughts on lessons learned from CrowdStrike. There are many. We could be here for the next 2 weeks sharing the ups and downs of the startup world. And I'll tell you, one of the best advice I've ever gotten was when I was starting the company, is that you were going to have the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows, and often on the same day. And that was absolutely true for like 10 years nonstop. So success is never a straight line. And then up until literally we went public, and afterwards, the challenges remained, and the perseverance has had to be there to keep fighting literally every day. Keep fighting for customers, keep fighting for against adversaries that we're facing, keep fighting the competition, and many others. So when we started the company, I'll share kind of three thoughts that I have in terms of key lessons learned. One is that I was really, really passionate about the problem. And I think so many times these days, you have founders that start with the solution rather than with the problem. And that's absolutely the wrong way to approach things. Adam and I get pitched like on almost daily basis of, I'm going to use AI to do this or that. And you can tell right away that the founder is actually, doesn't understand the problem, is not passionate about the problem. They're just trying to ride the buzz, the wave of the latest hot thing.
Want a conversion.
Yeah, and that's just the wrong way to approach this. And I'll tell you how CrowdStrike as an idea came about. I was at a larger company called McAfee, that no longer exists these days, but at the time, 15 years ago, was one of the largest cybersecurity companies. And I got a call from another small company called Google in January of 2010. And they told me that they had an incident, that they were hacked by China, a nation state, and they thought that many McAfee customers were hacked by the same threat actors. And that launched me on a multi-year set of investigations. I was running all of threat research and investigations at McAfee. And what I realized in doing that is that you had complete unawareness across the largest companies in the world and government agencies about the fact that you had nation states. You have China, you have Russia, you have Iran, you have North Korea, breaking into these companies, stealing their intellectual property, later on doing disruptive and destructive attacks against them. At the time, that was completely unheard of. The prevailing wisdom in 2010 is that hacking is done by teenagers or cyber criminals trying to steal your credit card, empty your bank account, and the idea that this was intelligence services, the idea that this was military agencies that were going to come after you as a private company was just completely unheard of. And in the course of about a year and a half, I was able to find out that literally every industry was getting hacked, and most of them were completely unaware of it. So that was an appreciation of, hey, there's a big problem here. The existing industry, my company, McAfee, and all the other ones are completely unaware that this is even happening, and kind of, to be honest with you, even uninterested in it, and kind of failing to appreciate it. And that if there was a way that we could actually solve this problem, then this could be a really, really big market. So that was the idea behind CrowdStrike. And the first lesson is that make sure that you have a clear set view on the problem you're solving, and hopefully it's a big one if you're trying to create a big company. The second thing is that the way that we set out to solve the problem, the way that I thought was really essential to defeat some of the smartest people in the world that are coming after these companies, is to have our own dream team and to seek out literally the best people in the world that we could find across the entire spectrum of jobs that we needed to recruit for. So certainly engineering, certainly product management, but also sales, marketing, whole solution set of the team that you need to build. And I knew that if I set my standard really, really high, almost impossibly high, that if I succeeded even 80% to that standard, we would build just an incredible team. Well, we actually succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. So I'll give you one example. One of the key hires that I made very early on, literally before we even had a company, before we announced funding was this individual by the name of Alex Ionescu, who was literally the top kernel engineer in the world. He had written the Windows internals book, for those of you that know Windows kernel. He was the guy that knew Windows kernel, and he also happened to be at the time employed by Apple, working, Steve Jobs was alive at the time, literally on special projects for C. So he knew the Mac OS kernel well, iOS kernel, and Windows kernel. Like literally, you could not find a better person in the world to recruit. And I thought there's no chance that I'm going to get this guy. He's working for Apple. He's got a ton of stock. He's working directly for Steve Jobs, but I'll give it a shot. And I literally gave him the pitch, actually, sort of a modified pitch that Steve Jobs had given to Scully back in the 80s when he was trying to recruit him to come from Pepsi to run Apple. If you recall that story, that famous story, he said, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to go change the world? So my pitch was, do you want to catch spies and protect the country, or do you want to continue building phones? And it worked to my shock. I was able to get Alex to come on board, and following Alex, like the floodgates just opened because people wanted to work with Alex, and we got so many people that literally you can just say, Alex is with us, and they're like, okay, I'm interested. Right, so that snowball effect of you get some incredible talent that they then start bringing in, that others start to say, I really want to work with the best people. That was all the difference for us, particularly in the early days, but even throughout the progression of the company. And then the third lesson, and this is not as applicable in all circumstances, but it was really the advantage of capital. So we knew that we were solving a really, really big problem, that the idea was not just like we're going to build technology to figure out how to stop these nation states from breaking into these companies. The idea was actually bigger than that. And we were thinking that if we could find a way to actually stop these breaches that were taking place by the most advanced actors in the world, we could actually solve all breaches. And the simpler ones, the cyber criminals, the teenagers that are doing this activity, would be really, really simple to do because you've been able to stop the Chinese intelligence service or the Russian intelligence service, right? After that, like, who cares about the cyber criminals? It's not a big problem. And when you're doing that, you've got two issues you got to solve for. One is the incumbents. So my old company, McAfee, and Symantec at the time was another huge company that were very entrenched. And they were sort of the old IBMs, if you will. Like, no one ever got fired for buying McAfee or Symantec cybersecurity solutions, even though they legitimately were not so good anymore. Literally 30-year-old technologies, legacy, did not appreciate the threat landscape, not cloud, not SaaS, literally all the things you don't want to be in a software business. But nevertheless, massive multi-billion-dollar businesses. And the second problem was that you got all these startups that are coming on board and getting funded. And at the time, the funding landscape was a little bit better than this one. We started the company in 2011, but it was still kind of early on. It was just a few years after the financial crisis. So the big rounds were not yet taking place. But we thought that we needed to have the runway to build a product that would not need to be re-architected in a couple of years, right? I see so many companies make what usually is a mistake, not always, but usually, which is not take enough funding right away, build a prototype, and then spend the next couple of years rewriting that prototype to make it scale, to make it better, and losing traction while, your competitors are coming ahead and eclipsing you. And we didn't want to do that. So we raised, at the time, it was I think the largest A round ever. Nowadays, it's not so big, but it was $25 million literally on a PowerPoint deck. But it was also a massive differentiator for us because it gave us a runway to build a product and build it the right way. And it also was a massive recruitment tool for us as well. I would have never gotten Alice if I would have that funding because he was never going to leave a stable job at Apple with really valuable stock options for a company.
How much did you give out for that $25 million? What was the valuation?
It was $50 million, so 50%. But, the way we looked at it, and that's another mistake I think a lot of founders make, is they get too overly focused on valuations. And I guess we'll talk about this later, but first of all, when you're picking an investor, it's not all about the valuation, and don't always take the biggest check that you get. It's about the fit, it's about the value they bring, but also even if you're giving up some dilution in the company, let me tell you, no one ever gets broke from dilution. And another piece of advice I got early on is, would you rather have a quarter of a watermelon or half of a pea, right? So that's how you need to think about it. Am I expanding my market opportunity? Is there a huge TAM here? And it didn't matter that we gave up 50% of the company early on because we built, a $50 billion company at the end of the day. So there was plenty of money to go around and make everyone very successful. So don't get overly focused on how much am I giving up. Think about what are you getting for that, and is that a good deal? Well, let me stop there, and I guess we'll get into the discussion.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those lessons. I want to incorporate Adam in the discussion, but actually a question for you on Adam is, tell us how you would introduce Adam to a crowd like this, and then from there, some of I'll ask Adam a question on if you disagreed with anything Dmitri just said.
He always disagrees with me. So Adam is incredibly shrewd and valuable investor. So he often, CrowdStrike, I guess, was a unique opportunity for you because you usually come in very early and you work with founders to kind of build things up. You came in when we were already a huge company.
It was still a venture return profile, which is nuts.
Were we still a unicorn, right, at that point?
Yeah. From $1 billion to almost 50 in like 3.5, 4 years.
Yeah.
But that was the latest stage company ever.
Yeah. But we had probably, 30 million ARR at the time? So
by the way, I knew the answer to your evolution question in the beginning, but you gave the answer I was trying to prompt for these folks, which is it's not all about valuation.
Yeah.
And hopefully they took notes on that. That's really important, especially in this market.
Yeah, no, but so I met Adam. Well, you tell the story. I met Adam at a dinner at a conference in Aspen, and I was there just by chance.
Fortune Brainstorm Tech.
Everyone hear Adam, by the way, in the back?
Fortune Brainstorm Tech was the conference that we were at.
Yeah, well, tell the story. You do better.
After you thought for 20 minutes. So they had just come in from a conference. What conference were you coming in from?
It was another conference in Jackson.
In Jackson,
yeah, we just flew in.
Or Jackson,
Wyoming.
Jackson, Wyoming. Yep. And they had just gotten off a plane, and we came to this dinner that Greg Croft was hosting. Do y'all know how many people in this room want to be an investor? Okay, how many want to be a
First, I want to be found.
Okay, and how many are engineers? Okay, and how many are on the business side? Cool. Did somebody raise their hand multiple times? Okay, cool. So some people don't know what they want to do. So how many of y'all know Greg Croft, a venture firm that's based in New York and LA? So they hosted a dinner at Dana Settle, who's a friend of both of ours, and Paul, hosts this dinner at Fortune Brainstorm Tech every year. And Paul, I guess, had just met Dmitri for the first time on this plane flight. And Paul and I are buddies. We've done some deals together. And I walk up. I decided not to go to another dinner to go to this dinner that night because
it changed your life.
It did change my life. It did. It changed my life. Dmitri has changed I'm on the record as saying Dmitri has changed my life for the good, which most people don't believe when I tell them.
Welcome to our live therapy session.
And Paul kind of whispered in my ear, hey, if there's anybody for you to spend time with tonight, it's that guy at the corner of the table. And I was like, that guy? He's like, yeah, what's the story? He goes, you'll figure it all out because that's what you do. I'm like, go sit there. And we ended up talking, I think, about everything the entire evening.
Well, I should clarify, Adam is an interesting fellow to talk to because he asks you a million questions. So I literally thought it was an interrogation session because it was just rapid fire of question. I don't think I got to actually ask you any of it.
No. And then at the end of the dinner, I said, I think this is almost verbatim what happened. I said, so here's the deal. I'm going to invest in your company.
And I'm like, yeah, right.
Yeah. He's like, yeah, right. We're not raising. The round's done. I go, no, you're going to let me invest in your company because you're going to build something much bigger than it is today. And you're going to create a lot of wealth for yourself. And you're going to need partners to help deploy that capital. And so I'm going to invest in you. I'm going to help you build your business. You're going to make me money. And then you're going to take that money and reinvest it back in me. And we're going to work together for years to come. And that's what happened. But Dimitri's a special guy. It's not every day you meet a technical founder that has the business acumen, the charisma, the vision, the leadership capabilities that Dmitri possesses. And what was unique about CrowdStrike, one of my favorite things to talk about CrowdStrike, well, one, I think it's probably the most successful fully distributed team that's ever existed. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this was really controversial. So this was 2011, long before COVID and Zoom. I'm not even sure Zoom existed at that point. If it did, no one was using it. And I was really passionate, as I said, about building the best team I could find. And I knew right away that I could not limit ourselves by a particular geography. And I was going to start finding people wherever they were, in California, in New York, Lakefront, Michigan, Germany, etc. So literally the first people I hired, about a dozen people that were in 5 states and 2 countries. And then it just snowballed from there. And honestly, it was really rough in those early days because we started using Skype, which was awful. Then if anyone was a gamer, there was this program called TeamSpeak that you can do voice chats with, and we're trying to coordinate that. Super disruptive and not actually working well. Thankfully, along the way, somehow we found Zoom or Zoom matured, and we're actually able to make it work. But honestly, I would not build a company any other way. I think companies that try to limit themselves to one geography, you're limiting your potential for finding talent, your potential for building a great culture. And honestly, also, one of the reasons I did it is that I knew, having worked in big companies in the past, that you eventually end up being distributed if your goal is to build a big company, right? So you acquire companies and you don't often control where they're going to be based. And that's,
I say brilliance is evenly distributed, opportunity is not, right? And so if you want to build a company with the most talented people on the planet, you have to go where they are, because you can't, it's not rational to think that you can bring everybody who's top in their field or in a particular role to Cambridge or to Austin. And so I think those days are long gone. It was happening in technology long before it happened in other industries, but now other industries are starting to realize. But one of the special things about Dmitri and the talent and the team that he built was, from the CEO and CTO and founders of the company down to the CFO and the president of revenue, you could basically input any of those individuals, anyone on the executive team, in any room, and they could go close a $10 million deal. They could go ink a partnership. They could go and speak on a panel. They were all equally effective. And I'd never really seen that in an executive suite before. It's oftentimes the CEO that you're bringing in constantly, but CrowdStrike was a different beast and a really special situation they had. And I think that's because of folks like Dmitri understanding that it takes a village to build something astronomical and valuable. And that village, everyone on that has different skill sets, but have to be complementary and compatible. And I think they did an exceptional job. And it's why they built an overnight 10-year success of a $50 billion cybersecurity company in a 10-year period.
I think to get back to sort of advice for you guys as you're thinking about starting companies, the one thing I would encourage you not to do is default into what's comfortable. So you may have a good friend that you're like, well, let's go start a company. Well, think really hard. No offense to this friend, but are they the right person? Do they have the right skill set for what you need? And sometimes the answer is no, and that's okay. And I just never, ever compromise on talent, because that is going to be the biggest differentiator of your success.
I'd love to, when we see you up here today, everyone thinks, very successful, and y'all are very successful. But one thing we were talking about on our walk over here is that success is not just a straight line, up and to the right. I'd love for you to share, both of y'all, some stories about the pain that CrowdStrike had to go through, and perhaps moments when you did not know the company would still be around.
Well, that was pretty much every day, where you run into all sorts of issues. I'll just say this: in 2016, there was this little incident that you may have heard about of the hack of the Democratic National Committee by the Russian intelligence services. So we were called in to do the response to that, and we're the first to do attribution. Fast forward 4 years later, I had no idea that we would be part of an impeachment against the president. part of the storyline around that. And the last thing we wanted to do was be part of any political story. We were non-political, we worked with Republicans, worked with Democrats. So being pulled into that nightmare was not something we were looking for, and had any idea going in that we were taking a contract from a very small outfit, the Democratic National Committee, for very little money actually compared to our big customers, and that would be a story for many, many years, and lots of conspiracy theories that would be generated about us. None of them obviously true. But I'll tell you one quick story.
A couple were pretty funny.
Nah, I could live without. But I'll tell you one quick story, and it tells you something about never underestimate your competition and never getting comfortable. So, as I said, like when we started, the idea was we have this big problem that people are getting breached by these nation states. Oftentimes, they don't know for years that their intellectual property, their trade secrets are getting stolen. So we came in and we were basically doing discovery of these breaches, helping them to identify them quickly and remediate their network. And the goal was always over time to also build a protection suite where you could actually stop these attacks in real time and stop like some of the run-of-the-mill malware you may encounter, so that we could actually come in and eventually replace, not just augment, the antivirus that everyone buys from Acme and Symantec. And that's how you ultimately build, multi-billion-dollar companies, by not just selling to the Fortune 500, but also going down market so that everyone in the world can use CrowdStrike and protect their computer against it, even if China is not targeting you, because realistically, they're not going to target everyone. And we always knew that this was going to be our path, but we thought that it was going to be very difficult to get there in the early days because of the sort of power of the incumbent, their marketing engine, etc. And as I mentioned, no one ever got fired for buying it. So our initial strategy was one of augmentation. And then a competitor comes along and starts marketing an AI-based antivirus engine that does protection, doesn't do anything about discovery of attacks, and is actually pretty terrible at discovering advanced attacks, but literally raises hundreds of millions of dollars and spends a lot of it on marketing to convince the world that the old legacy model of antivirus is dead, does not work, and that they had a perfect solution with their machine learning-based approach. And we turn around and suddenly they're in every deal that we're in, and suddenly customers are telling us, well, it's great that you discover attacks, but you don't really stop them. And we suddenly saw a slowdown in our sales and pipeline going to hell. And it was really a mortal problem for us. And it's not that we didn't have a plan to do this as well, but we just thought that we would get there in a few years, not right away. And we literally stopped everything in the company and said, for the next year, we're doing nothing but building basically an equivalent product.
How big was the company at the time?
It's probably 300-400 people.
Wow.
So this was a big change. Like, we literally froze the entire roadmap and said, this is the one thing we're doing this year. And we're building a competitive product so that we can do the detection and the protection piece and be competitive. And we did it. And that literally saved the company, because we were able to, a year later, come into the market saying, yeah, we do all the things that those guys do and much more. And we literally crushed them. So they got sold for $1 billion. We went public and created a company that's worth, I don't know what the market cap is. The basic sign on,
It's not worth what it was.
but at one point it was worth almost $60 billion.
I'd love to, when Adam and I typically find people undiscovered and then invest in them. When Adam met you, the company was already, established company. And
It was due risk.
it's somewhat.
It's funny because it was really well known by your circles and enterprise technology, but the consumer, it wasn't as high profile to consumers as it is today. Today, it's well known because
It's still not a consumer company.
right. It never was a consumer company, but consumers, because of their Formula One sponsorships and what have you, see the brand CrowdStrike a lot more frequently than they used to.
And I'm curious about, I'm sure all of us today can predict, oh yeah, that company Reddit might be bigger than it is today. I'd love to invest, but the ability to invest in a private company that's known is very hard. Tell us how you
Wait a month. Okay.
you pick it up. Tell us how you were able to kind of convince Dmitri and vice versa to be able to, have the privilege to invest into.
I'll answer that question, but first, Dmitri needs to answer your question of how he would describe me, and then maybe I'll pull from that and talk about why he let me in, because I actually never get to hear Dmitri describe me. I'd like to hear it.
Look, I gotten to know Adam not just as an investor in CrowdStrike, but now we invested jointly in a bunch of companies together. What's really remarkable is that as an investor, you are a mentor, you're a therapist, you are marriage counselor, partner counselor, sales leader, sort of all things in one, which is particularly critical early on, particularly for first-time founders that may not have an idea of how do I solve these problems, how do I overcome these challenges, and having someone that you can trust, that you can call up and is literally always available for a conversation is incredibly valuable. So I didn't necessarily need all that, but it was nice that you were able to offer it.
And so from your perspective, you're established, you meet Adam, what makes you in that moment open up the...
Well, so he pitched me, long-term, we're going to work together. I sort of discounted all that, to be honest with you. I was like, I need to, I'm focused on sales. I need to get the revenue to continue to double, to triple at the time. So that was his pitch to me, is I'm going to make a ton of interest for you. And he did.
It was more around diversification of the pipeline. So they were very strong in banking, the financial sector, but there were a number of other areas they were pretty weak. And so, as an investor, we're selling too, right? And so Dmitri didn't need like a chief strategy mind around him. They were a pretty established company. What we needed was, quite frankly, what a lot of venture capitalists are pretty good at, which is opening doors, which is not our favorite thing to do, but it's a requirement. It's one of many things that...
I'd be surprised, actually. Like, most of our investors did very little.
Well, they said they would.
Yeah, they said they would. How much? I mean, typically, very few do.
But for us, it was more about differentiated networks. We believe diversity breeds success, right? And so that includes the diversity you hire at your company, because there's networks of talent that know each other, and it's also networks of companies that know each other, right? So if you work with Lowe's, the likelihood that you work with a Home Depot and a Walmart and a Target is high. If you work with a bunch of companies in the region, Central Texas, the likelihood you're able to work with a HomeAway and a WP Engine and a Dell is a lot higher if you work with a bunch of them. And so they were really great in certain regions and in certain verticals, but they could use help in other. And quite frankly, as someone who was going fishing for a great company and a great team, the way in was talking about our ability to help them diversify their pipeline. And we worked hard at trying to do that, because at Mark VC, what we focus on is trying to leave our mark on every company that we get involved with. And the quickest way to leave our mark with CrowdStrike was to help drive revenue.
Both of y'all invest in companies today. It's 2023. What advice would you give to a room full of builders on kind of early mistakes that you've seen kind of first-time founders make? This question's for both of you.
So the world got pretty crazy in the last few years, and we're reverting back to the mean. I'll tell you, one of the best things we did when we raised $25 million is we told everyone in the company, just because we have a lot of money in the bank account does not mean we're going to spend on crazy stuff. And we were very, very frugal about everything but the things that were absolutely essential. I'll give you one example. Because the team was so distributed, the first thing we need to do was actually to bring them together to figure out how we're going to solve this problem. What are we actually going to build for the next couple of years? So I brought them all to New York, where we had our investor, or with Pincus, had their office. So it was free office space. We didn't have to pay for it. So we just parked ourselves at their offices for a week to figure out and plan out what we're going to build.
Dmitri built a $50 billion company. I still pick up lunch every time we're together. So if you want to know about how cheap it is.
But one of the things I wanted to do with the team is show them, okay, we're going to New York. We're not staying at the Park Plaza, whatever, the top hotel is in New York. We actually went out to, this was probably a little overkill, but we rented Long Island that literally almost had outlines on the floor. I was the last person that got shot in there. But it was an important signal to send. Yes, we have a lot of money, but we're going to watch every single penny. And nowadays, it's as important as it's ever been, right? The rounds are a lot smaller these days. Who knows when the capital markets will reopen? We may be going into recession. So every dollar that you can stretch is super, super vital. And I think a lot of founders just lost track of that when money was cheap. Well, we're no longer in that world anymore.
I would say that Dmitri's story, unfortunately, to a lot of people in this room, is not super relatable because he and his co-founder were known entities. Dmitri was an incredible success reputationally long before. He was the head of threat research at McAfee. And so most of y'all are, well, I'm guessing the average age is around 20 years old. I don't know if it's in this room. Raising $25 million is almost a guaranteed no for all of y'all for your first business. And so I think that how they operated, though, could be applicable. You're going to have to, in this market, I would say it's all about the right team, the right market. And if you are a founder going into biotech or life sciences and have the right team to go do that, and you're focusing on the right market, the product may evolve numerous times. You may have 100 different product ideas before you find one that actually has some sort of product vision fit, which leads to product market fit. And if you're building a platform, you're going to have numerous products that hopefully work out in the future. It's about getting lean, getting skinny, being creative, and having that capital stretch and finding someone to take a shot on you, right? And so Dmitri, he didn't always have an advantage, but when he started CrowdStrike, had an advantage, which is why Warburg Pincus gave him $25 million to start the business. We have a number of founders who struggle to raise their first $500,000, $2 million bucks, which is probably more likely the path that most of y'all will take in this room.
How do you think about kind of markets that young people work in, and how do you know when you should pivot or switch or change direction of your 300-400 person company? How do you think about that? And question for both of y'all, but more specific on the CrowdStrike front.
Well, what you don't want to do is pivot all the time, and that's obviously never good or disruptive. So you want to have the conviction, but you also want to be highly attuned to what your customers are telling you, what the market is telling you, and don't get overly focused on competition, but pay enough attention to them about how they're doing, how they're marketing it, how often you see them in competitive environments, and what you can frankly steal from them. Be shameless about it in terms of, is that messaging resonating better than your messaging? Do you need to tune something? Do they have a feature that you don't have that if you add can make a big difference to you? So be mindful of that. Know what you stand for and what you're trying to solve. Don't just be a copycat. But to the extent that you can borrow ideas from others, as long as it's legal and you're not stealing anyone's IP, go for it.
Adam, there's a few companies that come to mind. If you want to talk about one to scale that to pivot, we have a company called Imdella that's a fabulous founder, Jeremy Johnson. He built 2U, stopped out of Princeton with a semester left, started 2U, which became a $4 billion publicly traded company. Then went and built Imdella. Anyone here heard of Imdella? Okay, awesome. So Imdella was the largest engineering staffing company out of Africa. They believe as well that brilliance is evenly distributed, opportunities not. 1.2 billion people untapped across the continent of Africa. And they went and tapped into that talent and staffed up the biggest companies in the U.S. to solve the labor shortage we had on the engineering side, as well as the cost issues we were dealing with in the U.S. But there was a time when it was harder to become an Imdella than it was to get to Stanford, Harvard. The bar was very, very high. And there was a time, Jeremy was in a position where he had many tens of millions of dollars of cash in the bank. But the business model stopped working. And so he had to completely pivot the business to solve the same solution, but same problem, starting with the problem first, but changing the solution. So same problem in a different way, and had to get rid of building universities across the continent of Africa and move it to a managed marketplace of talent. Get rid of their physical space. They moved to a fully distributed team. And then coming out of that, raised a very large round at 1.7 billion with a clear path to profitability. Jeremy managed cash effectively, so he always made sure that he had plenty of runway to handle the business and to be successful, and never really spent ahead of where they were as a company. But he always raised ahead, so he understood, like, now's a good time. I'm going to raise capital now when I don't need it, when I can, because I have no idea if I'll be able to raise it tomorrow or a month later or 2 months later. And I think some of the best founders are really good. The line is so thin between whether or not you succeed or fail, and so many things have to go right. And so it's really great to have that mentorship around you to understand, hey, we have a company together where, quite frankly, we got lucky to raise the capital we did. Otherwise, we would be in a serious negative spot right now. And so, but it's also understanding that, hey, if I go raise at a large valuation, well, shit, I better make sure I have enough capital to build into that. And you're having a reckoning right now with a bunch of companies that are optimized for valuations. Dmitri said is not always the best idea, and probably won't make it because they may have $50 million in the bank and a $2 billion valuation, but they got $10 million in revenue, and they're decreasing, and it's low margin revenue, and they're just not a touchable company. And to go recap that entire company is too heavy lifting. It makes more sense to shut it down and back those founders in a different business.
I'd love to open it up for questions in one moment. Before we do that, excuse the ADD nature of this question, but I'd love for the two of you all, since we've talked about intros a few times throughout the discussion, I'd love for the two of y'all to actually give your introduction, but not today, but when you were 22 years old, when you were just exiting Georgia Tech or, St. Edward's, and like what you would have said to, if you were introducing yourself to a crowd. Yeah, your 22-year-old intro in short. What would you say, like, right in your early start?
Think about it.
Adam Zeplain, security guard to Corey Levy. No. I think I would have said, Adam Zeplain, born and raised in Texas. Had 8 internships throughout college, started a company that did well, shut it down when I was around 20, 21 years old to go intern at a venture firm, was the first intern they hired full time. And now I'm a venture capitalist at a firm in Austin, Texas, one of a few, trying to make our mark on the world, trying to back the entrepreneurs best fit to solve the biggest problems.
And played college baseball. Dmitri?
Graduate of Georgia Tech. Actually, first graduate out of their cybersecurity, at the time it was called information security program. Really passionate about cyber. Had a company that I started in high school that continued through college, and want to work in small companies. I actually turned down a job from Microsoft, which was probably the best thing I ever did, to go work for a small startup and learn and get the startup bug.
It's great. I'd love to open it up to questions. And please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Nico. I'm a senior at MIT. I'll launch a little question from Dmitri. He mentioned very early on that you hired in multiple countries, including in your early team. Did you encounter many legal hurdles or trouble with doing that, or worry about kind of establishing presence in other countries?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. So it's easier now, and there's lots of online services now that can make it much easier. But yeah, you got to get law firms in those countries. You got to get payroll providers and everything else. So if you haven't raised a lot, I wouldn't necessarily go international right away, but certainly 50 states. And that comes with overhead as well, because you got to file employment in all the 50 states and set up tax payments and all that stuff. So it's not super easy, but folks like Gusto and Zeplain, all those folks make it much easier. Zen Business is a company that helps you do that.
Mandela. Yeah. Mandela.
He's Zerad. Or please introduce yourself.
And so, hi, I'm Sarah, senior at MIT. I guess question for Adam, but I guess first question is what your investment thesis generally is, and I guess too, you mentioned building together. So how do you kind of think about building versus investing? How you want to spend your time?
Got it. How we focus on helping companies succeed versus investing in new ones.
For I guess you mentioned you and Dmitri working all things together.
Oh.
So that versus investing.
Well, we invest together.
Yeah. What we work on together is we bring him into stuff that we're investing in. He brings us into stuff he's investing in. But our thesis, by the way, is it evident how much he loves me?
But I'll tell. He has live therapy session continued.
So what we look for, it's pretty set. One, we're a generalist fund. So whether it's in biotech or defense or life sciences or cybersecurity, home security, data, healthcare, AI.
You look for great founders.
We look for incredible founders trying to solve a really big problem. And we think the bigger the problem, the better the outcome. And most simply put, that's what we look for. And there are certain things we look for that we think make great founders, characteristics that we look for.
And one of the
Okay. There are 5 key characteristics we look for really in all interpersonal relationships, whether it's a good friend, a partner, a buddy, a romantic relationship, a business partnership, a colleague we hire, collaborators, and that is ultra high integrity, givers versus takers, learners versus knowers, excellence in what they do, and resilient as fuck. Those are the 5 things that we look for. And if you don't have those 5 things, probably not going to be your friend. Probably not going to work with you. Certainly not going to invest in you.
not going
And definitely not going to date you. Although we went out a couple times. I mean, and then the other thing we look for is, a lot of people go through life. I guess, how many of y'all have been on the first date and you're there trying to figure out if this person will accept you, if you can convince them to like you versus like whether or not you are compatible with each other. Focus on acceptability versus compatibility. Raise your hand if you've gone into a first date looking for being accepted versus figuring out if you're compatible with the person. Be real, come on. I know every guy in this room is raising. And so I think that one of the things that's really important when meeting investors or founders for the first time is focusing on the compatibility portion versus being accepted. And so I think that's we don't look to be accepted by the people that we meet. One of the reasons I was so turned on to work with Dmitri was the fact that I thought we were incredibly compatible as business partners. And that's something we really focus on when it comes to hiring, looking for founders that we put together. When it comes to collaborating with other folks, we walk into a meeting trying to figure out if we think it can be a compatible, mutually beneficial relationship long-term versus trying to convince them to work with us.
Please. Bulgaria. I want to ask you specifically about cybersecurity because that's the field I'm working in. You coming off from Maccabi with like a very, very significant cybersecurity experience. That probably really opened your doors when you were working on the specific stuff. One thing I want to ask is kind of from my experience, as a young founder in cybersecurity, is a somewhat more difficult kind of pathway, but I'm still very passionate about it. So I just want to get your feedback on kind of a way maybe that you would give feedback to on how to de-risk the kind of the ideas and having the team. Is it kind of certifications? Maybe kind of if you could talk about this specifically.
It's definitely not certification. So whenever I hire people in cyber, and if they have a bunch of certificates, that's almost a negative.
Did you see that about briefing the Dmitri Alperovitch Center for Cybersecurity, Johns Hopkins, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you de-risk it by having co-founder with experience. Look, it was incredibly helpful that by the time I started CrowdStrike, I had spent 13 years in the industry and I had a ton of relationships, right? The first probably half a dozen customers we got were relationships, right? They didn't buy it because they knew us. They bought because they like a product, but we got meetings with them because of the relationship, right? That's invaluable. And if you don't have that, you want to make sure you're partnering with someone that does, because it's really, really hard to build it from scratch otherwise.
Please. Hey guys, thank you for coming. My name is Saranga. I'm from Baz College. I'm a senior there. So Adam, you mentioned talking about the compatibility rate. As a young founder, what are some good questions to ask to kind of gauge that compatibility and know if it's the right fit?
Yeah, I think you really have to know the individual, right? So that goes down to understanding the household they grew up in, the relationship with their parents, their siblings. You're looking to get married to this person, professionally.
By the way, he is not kidding. Like when he interviews a founder, right? First stage founder.
Careful, we're recording it.
Yeah. He spends, weeks learning about that person. And, if you were raising money from Adam, do expect that he's going to call your ex, your spouse, your girlfriend, your parents, and really figure out what makes it there.
When you're investing in early stage, whether it's pre-seed like Corey does a lot of, or seed like we do a lot of, it's team, market, product, and team is everything. And very few people really truly know the team before they write a check. And so understanding what they're like in wartime, what they're like in peacetime, their selfish tendencies, right? The different things that,
Do the listen.
yeah, are they listeners? Are they knowers? All these things really matter, right? And so you have to really, I would say that one of the great ways to do this is a lot of people need to build trust to be able to be vulnerable, right? So they trust first and they lead with vulnerability afterwards.
I guess my question was, from the founder side, how do we understand that compatibility with the investor?
Oh, not founder to founder, but founder to investor.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, same thing. Flip it around. You have the ability and the right and the desire to, and then the right to interview them the same way they would interview you. You should be doing reference checks on your investors. You should be asking for statements of, examples of the work they've done. And you should feel as comfortable pushing and challenging them the same way that they push and challenge you. They'll probably respect you more for it.
For sure.
And so, it is a two-sided deal where not only do they have to sell you and show you that they're compatible with you, but you have to feel the same way about them.
And by the way, if the signal you get is, oh, we don't have time for this, well, guess what? If they don't have time now when they're trying to quote you,
That's right.
they're certainly not going to have time once they write the check. It's going to move on.
The work's done for a lot of people. That
Perfect.
Frederick, PhD candidate in cybersecurity here. So what cybersecurity problems that are unsolved, what do you think is most interesting? What are you looking for in the future? Things that you would like to see eventually and so forth?
It's a good question. I think the market has changed dramatically now. To be honest with you, I personally don't actually invest a lot in cyber these days because of the trend lines that you have with Microsoft and others, that bigger companies that have come in and taken a lot of the refill opportunities. The one area that I think is still ripe for major disruption is identity. And you have a lot of companies that are trying to enter that space from different angles, but there's a lot in authorization, identity space that you could do very differently.
Hi, my name is Mauricio. I'm a junior at MIT. I have a question directed for Dmitri. So you mentioned that a couple years ago you raised $25 million. It was highest at the time. Congratulations for that. I want to know, sort of your thoughts on why the landscape has changed so much over the last couple of years and where you see it going in the future in a non-zero interest rate regime. Do you think this is perhaps an existential problem for Silicon Valley? And what sorts of markets do you see gaining popularity? Chiefs.
Well, we raised in 2011. So at the time was one of the largest, if not the largest, day rounds. But things got very, very crazy in the zero interest rate environment. That was not rooted in reality. So I think what we actually have now is a reversion to reality, where you're not going to have these massive rounds. They're going to be more the exception than the rule. But that's fine. It's going to teach founders how to be more disciplined, how to use their resources more effectively. It's also going to eliminate some of the capital advantages that you did have early on. So you had companies that were perhaps not great businesses that were able to hide that by raising a ton of money and just being able to grow by virtue of spending lots of money. That's really over, right? So one of the key metrics now that people look at when they invest at a growing business is the burn multiple. How many dollars are you burning for every dollar you bring in?
what do you want to say, Dmitri?
Well, you want to see around 1 or even less than 1 if you want profitability in a business. But people were spending 4 or 5x. Spending $4 or $5 to bring $1, right? That was insanity. That was not sustainable, and we'll probably, I don't want to say never get back to that, but we won't get back to that for a very long time. And should.
Yeah, it's just the playing field's been level from a capital advantage standpoint. You're not going to see many companies do what you do for a long time.
Griffin, and then
Okay. I'm Griffin. I'm here about that, sir. Question for Dmitri. So
talking about like important work in bird defection, and I was wondering what like whether you think people nowadays should do like some kind of ways to, as you had done, and how important if you think that is like nowadays as well.
Oh, I think technical skills are incredibly important regardless of your role in the company because it allows you to call BS on what you're hearing from your team, right? So even if you're a CEO and you're talking to your engineering team and they're telling you, oh, we can get it done in a month, then, if you've got the technical skill sets to know that that's not doable in a month or it can be done in a week, you can keep pushing them. And that's really vital. So the more you can combine sort of technical acumen with business acumen, the better off you're going to be as a founder. You really need everything. You need to understand sales, you need to understand marketing, you need to understand engineering, you need to understand product management. And if you don't know it, that's fine. Go learn. And you can talk to so many people, right, that have done it, learn how they do it. You can read, the resources that you have now in terms of blogs and everything else that you see from venture capitalists and founders and creators are just tremendous in learning how to actually do this stuff. Keep learning.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
So I think being here, I just want to ask you, probably both of you talked about what's the path like becoming the private founder. What is the path like from the very best?
A lot of trial and error. I mean, I'm definitely a much better investor today than I was when I was 20 years old. I've been doing this for 15 years. I think it's honing in on, there's a bit of pattern recognition that definitely takes effect, but you're also, I think some of the best investors I know have a childlike curiosity that never leaves. Jim Breyer is one that I think of right now that I think he's probably around 60 now, and he still is as curious.
Say who he is.
Oh, I don't even know. Jim Breyer is one of the best venture investors to ever do it. He built Excel with Arthur Patterson into what it became, was the first institutional investor in Facebook, joined the board of them, Blackstone, 21st Century Fox, Marvel, Dell, Walmart. He's, and I'm fortunate enough to have him as a backer and partner of mine, mentor and friend. And I think one of the things I respect most about guys like Jim Breyer or guys like Scott Malpass, who ran Notre Dame's endowment, who backed people like Jim Breyer and is also a supporter of mine, is that they never stop learning. And they live to learn, to ask questions. They do a lot more asking than they do preaching. And that's my favorite thing about this job is I get to sit down with people like Dmitri. I'll never be as good at what he does as he is. I'll never know his business better than he knows it. My goal is to learn as much as I can, try to figure out, gaps I can fill and figure out how to best support him. And so I think understanding that you'll never know as much about the companies as the people you're meeting with, having a childlike curiosity. And
by the way, what you're hearing is a message that they want to deliver to you, not necessarily the reality oftentimes.
Say that again. So
when you're getting pitched, you're getting their version.
Oh, that's right.
Of the reality.
Yeah. I mean, I a lot of people believe in innocent until proven guilty. I'm the opposite. So I believe everything's completely full of shit until I can validate it. And I would say I love all but trust few. So I can be generous and sweet and kind to everybody. And again, back to what I was saying earlier, I lead with vulnerability to build trust, and I'm an open book. But I go verify and validate everything. So I would say be cautiously optimistic, and be obsessive around the details, and make sure you have everything buttoned up. Because
so I would say discount all future projections, particularly in this day and age. I just don't
specifically early stage investing.
Yeah. But even later stage, a lot of people have just unreasonable expectations that often change by the time you get to the first board meeting. Wait a second, you said you would grow out of 50%, and now I see 70% on the board deck. How did that change? But the second thing is don't fall in love with the product or the space. The founders, again, to what Adam just said, are so key to this, and particularly founders that are arrogant, run the other way, because those are the people that are never going to listen, and maybe they'll get lucky and they'll do the right things, but more often than not, they'll make mistakes, and because they'll refuse to listen and take advice, they can literally ruin the company.
There's a big difference between confidence and ego, right? Confidence is rooted in security, and being secure with your insecurities, right? Dmitri's a confident person. Ego is rooted in insecurity, right? So we look for confident founders, and we run from egotistical ones. It doesn't mean that egotistical founders have not been successful. Some have been some of the most successful. But we also look for that learner's mentality in the founder. And I think the best advice depends on if you want to be an early stage investor or a later stage investor, but become really good at evaluating human potential. Go start watching some of the best sports psychs out there, like Adam Grant, who's a buddy and awesome guy. My favorite thing, the favorite person I get to have a call with is when we nerd out for a couple hours, blowing at each other and learning from one another. His stuff, he's got many TED Talks. He's active. I'm sure a lot of you follow him. Try to understand the science of people, not just the science of the business. Because if you're an early stage investor, that's part of your job.
One quick thing I'll add is that it's a compounding sport. You can maybe get started right now. I remember when I was in college, I was thinking I needed a lot of money to invest, but in fact, Adam's 8-year-old son wrote like a small check with his lemonade money into a company that Adam invested in.
Now he's a billionaire, right?
Yeah, thankfully, because he's part of Dmitri created a trust.
There are a few Z fellows in the room, and some of the Z fellows have invested like $1,000 into each other, and small amounts of money that they've earned in their internships into each other. And so, best piece of advice would be like just invest in your smartest friends that you meet in the school. And do it here.
What's your name? Jan? Okay, I'm going to tell a story that I think is really good. So I was at South by Southwest, and I was in a room with some
Confidence, not arrogance.
I said, I think is really good. At the end of it, y'all can tell me whether it's good or not, okay? By a round of applause. And so there's this investor that you and I actually both think pretty fondly of. I think probably one of the best consumer investors of his time. And he had been operating a number of individual businesses, and there were a bunch of kind of the top investors and entrepreneurs in the country, all at this private happy hour that a friend of mine hosts every single year around South by Southwest. And one of his former colleagues who was at Sequoia, he was at a different firm. And she said, hey man, I'm just now in the venture. You've been in it for a while now. You've done some pretty good stuff. What's the advice I need to know about becoming a great investor? He said, the advice I have to give you is you don't get better at this game. You're either good or you're not. And I'm good and I'm going to keep being solid, but this is not a sport where you get better as time goes on. And in that moment, I was like, this guy will not be doing this very much longer. And he's not. He went back to operate. The investments he made did not go very well. And that is like the complete opposite, polar opposite of, I think, the right investor or founder mentality. But it was really interesting when I heard that and that level of conviction and him say that you don't get better. You were as good as you're ever going to be when you start. I was like, that person just isn't going to make it.
I just heard a story from a really famous investor. You would know him. I was having dinner with him recently. I won't use his name, but he told me about the biggest return he's ever gotten in an investment, and was one where he put money down expecting to lose it all because he had no faith in the company. He had no faith in the person running it, but he had just got into a major fight with that person, and he wanted to make up and wrote a check literally to save the relationship. It ended up being his greatest return ever. And this is a person that's made a lot of money over the years and lots of different things. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
I want to make sure I avoid any questions over here. I want to make sure I don't ignore the side of the room. But any last questions? Yes.
Thanks for coming here today. I was at Word. Yes, Harvard. And for both of you, I was just curious if you could go back to when you were freshly out of college. Is there anything you would do differently, or wishing?
Well, given where I ended up, I wouldn't do anything. But there were actually a lot of choices.
That answer. One thing you change?
I'm sure I can't think of any major ones, but
he would have changed a couple things.
a course of my life maybe, but not really out of college. But I'll tell you, there were choices, right? You know, I had an offer from Microsoft, and a lot of my friends took that offer, and they're still basically doing the job they were doing 20 years ago, right? I mean, it kind of elevated a little bit, but you know, when you go join a big company, it's you know, be prepared to stay there for a long time, and you know, that's fine for some people, but it's going to be really, really hard to escape. And you also can't really learn a lot in a big company because you're just siloed, right? You know, you're working on your thing, and you know, if you're in like engineering, you're not going to learn anything about sales or marketing or anything like that because you're just so far disconnected from the business. But go join a small startup, even if it's not going to be successful, and you're going to be doing everything. My first CEO had a great line. He said, and I passionately believe that everyone is in sales. If you're not selling, you're buying. And in a startup, that is absolutely the case. And you just learn everything. You're going to be doing customer support. When a big customer calls and they have an issue, you're going to be on a sales call to help a salesperson sell something because you need to close that deal or the company will go under, right? So you just get exposed to everything and you learn so much. You build relationships that will help you launch your own thing later on. So, you know, I didn't jump. I had a small company when I was in high school and college, but I didn't jump into creating my own thing right away because I thought that I wanted to get that experience under my belt, and that was really useful. But I'm really glad that I didn't go work for Microsoft.
I love Dmitri like a brother, but I hate when people give that answer, which is I wouldn't change anything because I think if people are being honest with themselves,
You say I'm not honest?
I'm saying you're not being honest with yourself in this moment. I think that there are all sorts of things. I think what probably holds true for Dmitri, as well as I know Dmitri, is that he understands that the decisions that were made are fixed and they're done, and you can't worry about what you could have done better because that's done. You got to focus on the future. The Dmitri I know, I think, feels that way internally.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I want to caveat that I feel the same way as Dmitri. We align on that. But if I could go back in time and change it, I don't spend time thinking about it because I can't. But for this particular question, I will. Yeah, there's many things that I would have done that I wish I knew then that I didn't know now. One of the things is I thought that experience didn't matter and intellect was everything. And I think I thought that because that's all I had going for me. And so I tried to walk in and try to show people that
I didn't think that, so I was right.
Oh.
Then you go,
right. Dmitri would say that he knew that. This is how we talk every single day to each other, by the way, which makes living life with Dmitri virtually so fun. And you can't do this unless you really love each other and have respect for each other. Otherwise, you get your feelings hurt. So I walked in trying to show something else I didn't realize. Actually, I had a lot of ego when I was younger in my career, like insecurity. And I tried to make up for it with bravado in the office operationally. And I had this one executive who didn't like me very much when I went to go operate. I left venture for a little bit to operate. And he said, you know, Adam, you're the smartest guy I ever worked with. I said, cool. He goes, you know your problem? I go, what? He goes, you fucking know it. I was like, I don't know that I do. He goes, well, you act like you do. And that was like kind of eye-opening for me because I was like, man, like I'm doing this the wrong way. And when I left the company, exited the company, this person changed and wrote me a review that said, one of the most curious people for feedback that I've ever seen. And from that moment on, I was like, man, like I need to be aware of experience does matter. If I could choose wisdom over intellect, I choose wisdom every day of the week. And I know a lot of smart people who aren't wise, but I know nobody who's wise that's not smart. That was like a defining moment for me, understanding that that I came in there trying too hard and I wasn't being my authentic self because I was rooted in ego versus confidence. And I was able to flip that around. And so I wish someone would have told me to check the ego at the door earlier than I had to realize myself. I think that I would have been more careful with the internships that I did.
How much time do we have? No, I'm kidding.
One of them spending time with this guy. By the way, we lost that investment. Investing in you. But it's paid dividends. I can't joke as much with him. He's more sensitive.
About the closed therapy session, but
Yeah, there are a lot of things differently. My dad died when I was 20 years old. I wish I would have spent more time with him. I was so focused on trying to do all sorts of cool things. And I was like, I got to make it. I got to drive. That I think sometimes I lost track of some of the most important things. I don't know. There are a number of things that I could have done differently, but the flip side of that is I wouldn't be where I am, who I am, and how I am if I wouldn't have done all those things. And so I'm appreciative and I feel blessed for having those experiences. But yeah, I mean, dude, we can always do better. Anyone who tells you that they can't, run away. Except for Dmitri, because I know him better than he knows himself. So now he knows what he meant to say. Well, I may switch into the translation space for Dmitri as a living.
any kind of closing remarks from the two of y'all, and any, broadly, if people were to cold outreach to you, any questions you have for them?
I'll say this, don't spend a lot of time worrying about your career path and how things are going to happen to you. I never did, and I always thought that luck was all about seeing the opportunities that come at you, evaluating them, and figuring out how to take the right one. And, that takes a little bit of a instinct, but also appreciation for the opportunities that do come along. And all of us throughout our lifetime will get a bunch of those opportunities. And don't stress too much if you decide to take a different path and, may decide that was a mistake, because something else will come along inevitably. And, thankfully, life is short, but it is long enough that you get to have a lot of decisions that hopefully you'll decide the right way, and it's going to work out. So I'm an optimist in that way. Usually I'm a pessimist, but in that way, I'm...
Yeah, I would take a different approach. Shocker.
The wrong one.
Shocker, yeah. I think that one of the things that really served me well and served Corey well in his life was we were old souls, like a lot of you probably are in this room. And we were constantly hacking around and trying to figure out what we wanted to do at a young age for a living with our lives, what problems we wanted to solve. And that led both of us to having many internships. I mean, Corey, I think, got turned to a Founders Fund when he was 16 years old. Is that right? I had a bunch of weird, fun internships as well. And those were all really important because I found out a lot of things I didn't want to do. And that really helped to where I was lucky enough to when I was still in school, because I had so many internships and did so many different things, that I came out with a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to spend a large chunk of my life doing, which I wouldn't have done if I wouldn't have spent so much time focusing on, how do I want to contribute? I still made time to, be a good friend and have a little bit of fun. I didn't have as much fun as a lot of my friends did in college, but to me, college was growing up and leaving the nest for the first time and figuring out how I want to spend my life and what I want to spend it doing. And so I'm glad I did that, because I found what I think is a big part of my purpose in life a lot sooner, because I found I did a lot of things I didn't like doing, and I learned very quickly. And so I think it's important to, you're this age once, and youth is a tool. And when you're young, people like us want to spend time talking to you and helping unleash potential and learning about you. And when you get to be 26, 36, 46, you can't use the, hey, I'm a young student at Harvard. I'd like to talk to you and have or MIT or Babson or wherever you go, or Tufts. I'd like to pick your brain. But you could be unemployed and not know what you're going to do in life at 20 years old and get into doors you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into. And so I would say get into as many of those doors as possible, learn as much as you can, and try.
Oh, I didn't contradict any of that.
You said don't focus on what you want to do.
No, I didn't say that.
That's what. Play the tape. Play the tape. Sure.
Well, with that, thank y'all for joining and spending time with everyone, and thank y'all for being here and listening.
I love you, man.